Welcome to the Authority File. I'm Bill Mickey, your host and the editorial director at Choice. Before I introduce our next episode of the Authority File, I want to remind our listeners that we have a brand new podcast on the way. It's called Patron Driven, and it's a narrative-style podcast that brings you crowdsourced library stories where the personal meets the professional. Season 1 is a 5-part series that follows 4 librarians through the destruction of the Lone Star College Kingwood Library after Hurricane Harvey and the 2 years it took to rebuild. It's a really incredible story and features writing and producing from the whole podcast team here at Choice, including Mark Dirks, Sabrina Kofer, and myself. I hope you'll tune in. Patron Driven debuts in late June wherever you get your podcasts. You can visit our website, choice360.org, and click on the librarianship drop-down to sign up for email updates about Patron Driven. While you're there, you'll find behind-the-scenes bonus content for the new program, and you can check out the new trailer for the upcoming series. Okay, so in the meantime, in the next episode of this podcast, we're going to be talking about how librarians can support critical thinking in an era of misinformation and fake news. If you're thinking information literacy, you'd be correct, but this is not your traditional approach to InfoLit. My guests have all built their own programming and instruction that is specifically aimed at combating today's fire hose of alternative facts, faulty research, and the digital technologies that enable them. We'll discuss their specific approaches, how they constructed their workshops and lessons, and how the traditional approach to InfoLit instruction may be changing for good. My guests are Sarah Morris, Head of Instruction and Engagement at Emory University Libraries, Dan Chibnall, STEM Librarian and Assistant Professor of Librarianship at Drake University, Roz Tedford, Director for Research and Instruction at Wake Forest University, and Mila Steele, Senior Publisher, Social Sciences at Sage Publishing. This series is brought to you by Sage Publishing. In this third episode, we talk about some of the methods our guests use to disabuse students of what they think is already true. I do want to jump ahead here to sort of and talk a little bit about, really what this all looks like in execution. And speaking of critical thinking, one of the issues, that we see today is obviously people have different sets of facts. People believe what they want to believe, despite the evidence to the contrary. And I'm wondering what this might look like as you are teaching your courses, and some of the ways you've actually developed to basically separate alternative facts from actual facts. How are you disabusing people of what they think is already true? And Dan, I'll just pitch this to you first.
Sure. So, one of the things that I try to do when it comes to like alternative facts and people's belief systems and how to, get people to change their thinking about that is I try to use like a blend of popular and scholarly sources in my class. So, this is a blend of like articles and book chapters. And I do this because I want the students to see sort of these wide-ranging common ideas that the general public are being exposed to, right? And so if the idea has merit, if the belief or concept or scientific thing, whatever it is, if it has merit and evidence behind it, then we can find that that foundation and that linkage in the scholarly material. So then we examine that. But if the idea does not have any merit, if it's baseless, then there's nothing there, So like, with climate change, if somebody says, oh, well, this isn't man-made. Okay, great. You can write an op-ed about that and people will see it. Okay, where's the science behind that? Show me the science that shows this isn't man-made. Well, there's very little of it, if any at all. And so all of a sudden you just sort of open this door and it's an empty closet. There's nothing in it. So I try to do this through the use of different types of sources. I want them to see that popular sources are important for helping to understand concepts, but popular sources are also helpful because they give us a chance to see what the public is seeing and know how to basically operate against that. I often use an analogy in my teaching that it's kind of like in baseball, a hitter has to be able to recognize certain types of pitches. And so what we're doing with this kind of stuff is knowing, okay, here comes a curveball. What do I do with it? How do I hit it, right? I want to make sure I don't swing and miss, right? So what we're doing is we're recognizing pitches and knowing what to do with them and how to either take them or hit them or foul them off and in what situation. And some of the students, they kind of get that, but then others, it takes them a while to come around to it. But that's kind of how I
Yeah.
go about that.
That is a fantastic analogy. I love that.
Oh, thank you.
Roz, how about you? How are you approaching this?
So it's tricky. So we do it sort of in two ways. So one of the things we spend a whole week, at least we did this semester, was in talking about the death of expertise, right? About that idea that just because someone can put something out there does not somehow make them an expert. So we look sort of more in depth at how do people in disciplines, how do scientists, how do journalists, right? How does expertise get built up over time? And a lot of our students were even sort of surprised to find out that journalism is actually something people go to school for, right? That there are advanced degrees in journalism, right? That there's a whole series
Yeah.
of methodologies and practices and right and literatures and theory and all of that behind journalism. So we try and talk about how just because you say you're an expert, you're not, and here's what expertise really is, and here's what it looks like. And sometimes they write in journal articles, and sometimes they write in government reports, and sometimes they write because they're an envoy to the UN or whatever. So we spend some time talking about that. And then when we start our junk science unit, we spend time going back and just looking at the scientific method, right? And talking about how every scholarly journal article, whether that's social science, whatever, is this tiny little piece of this giant jigsaw that is, whatever, cancer or Shakespeare or, the Civil War or whatever. And that no one piece is going to have the entire set of answers to something, and that built
Hmm.
up over time pictures start to fill in, and that is where facts are, that no one journal article is going to suddenly say that climate change is real or not real, right? And I mean, that's one of the problems with climate change, anyways, that there's never going to be the definitive single study, right, that says
Hmm.
yes, climate change is happening. And so we try and a lot of them have had the scientific method back in a biology class or a chemistry class or whatever, but they've never really seen it sort of holistically as to how that helps build up knowledge. There's also, if you all haven't heard of it, an amazing John Oliver like 20-minute segment on science and science reporting. And it's absolutely amazing because it talks about replication studies and the importance of those. And our students are now all about replication studies. And, they keep sending us new things that are like, this one needed a replication study.
It
Anyway,
is
so
an
if y'all haven't looked that up,
excellent
it's
segment.
a terrific, one of the best segments ever. So do you use it too, Sarah?
I do. It's fantastic. I absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I do the same thing too. Also, his piece
Yeah.
on whataboutism, because we talk about that quite
Yeah.
a bit.
That's good.
Yeah.
That's a good one.
Yeah, I'm wondering, you're all kind of repeatedly touching on, the news and advertising and business of journalism and not just that, but, sort of how science research is conducted. And there seems to be this underlying kind of need to cover the basics in terms of, how does this content get out there and why and sort of recognizing the difference, for example, between an opinion piece in a newspaper versus an actual article, and how certain and why certain personalities are invited onto cable news programming. For example, why are we listening to politicians talk about health policy or climate science versus having an actual scientist or health professional on the program talk about this? And so I'm wondering, Sarah, I think you had sort of found ways to partner up with the media studies program as one way to sort of work this in there.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think for me at least, I mean, I could stand up and talk till I'm blue in the face about why an alternative fact is false, not true. But I've found in my classes and in partnerships, it's good to think about ways to, empower your students and your learners with this better understanding of all these systems and factors and this entire ecosystem. So the business model and why journalism works the way it does and why you're seeing what you're seeing and the technology underlying all of this stuff. So that's definitely been an approach I've been trying to take in the instruction we're doing. And I think it's helped facilitate, interdisciplinary partnerships as well, whether it's, faculty who focus on media studies. Two of my co-teachers in the class I did, one of them has a background in more, psychology and study of memoir and human memory and things. Another focused on political advertising. And so we all sort of came together in the space to discuss these issues. Similar with, we have a robust, obviously, like health science program at Emory. And so how can you connect with sort of professionals in that space as well? So I found that really rewarding and helpful and sort of kind of growing these programs and thinking about these things from a more interdisciplinary perspective. And it's just been great to sort of connect with people on different aspects of this topic and kind of explore it through different lenses with students.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. I'm wondering if it sounds like, in certain cases you've had to do more than simply show students what an authoritative resource is, that you have to sort of provide some level of comfort and confidence around that. It's more than simply pointing them towards, an information product or a database or whatever. I'm wondering if the three of you could talk a little bit about some of the methods behind sort of, providing that comfort level around, these big resources, and whether it's how to use them or sort of puncturing the density, I suppose. Roz, why don't we start with you on that one?
So I think one of the ways we ease students sort of into this is we talk, and I'm sure Sarah and Dan do this as well, most librarians do,
Mm-hmm.
is we talk about the information timeline, right? We talk about, and we told our students this semester at the very beginning, I'm like, something is going to happen this semester, and mis and disinformation is going to swirl around it, and we're going to pause class one day, and we're going to come in, and we're going to have a conversation about that. And then Kobe Bryant died, and we thought, hey, there we go, that's all right, that's our thing. So we were able to come in, and students all came in with all the rumors and all of the craziness, right, about Kobe Bryant, and we were able to sort of lay the information timeline on top of the Kobe Bryant thing. And we thought, hey, yay, we're done, dust our hands off, right? And then, of course, coronavirus hits, and it's another whole thing. But we were like, well, yeah, we had a little false confidence there. But so we were able to say, okay, so where were you when you first heard that Kobe Bryant died? And I happened to have been in Home Depot and overheard two people talking, right? And so we were able to say, like, you first heard about it, most of them heard about it on social media or through a text, and we were able to say, okay, and then, sort of a couple hours later, you started to get the CNN reports and the news reports, and then the next day there was a New York Times article, right? And then we brought in a week later, right, a Time Magazine article. So we were able to sort of lay that out, and we talked along that way about who were going to be the experts in this. And certainly, some Twitter account that you have no idea who it is not ever going to be an expert, right, in this. But what sort of information are you going to believe when it rolls out? Maybe a first responder, maybe a family member of Kobe, right? That's who you're going to believe. And so, I always like tying those things to, I used to use, 10 years ago, I'd use where were you when 9/11 happened? But of course, none of our students were born when 9/11 happened, which is a little depressing. But like there going to be those things that we're going to be able to sort of lay that out and talk about in this moment, right? Who should be believed? And then, and then we can talk about, 6 months from now, maybe there's a book that comes out on it, and right in a year after that, maybe there's some scholarship that's been done and some scientific reporting that's been done. So that's one of the ways, and there are others, but that's one of the ways we've sort of talked about that sort of expertise is not necessarily relative in the big picture, but it is relative to the time at which you are distant from whatever it is that you're studying, and different kinds of content is going to need different kinds of expertise.
Mm-hmm. Dan, Sarah, would you agree?
Yeah, I mean, a couple of things that I do is to touch on what Roz said. I make sure that we understand what the information creation process and cycle look like in different disciplines or in different events of the day, so that people get a sense of, what comes first, what comes next, how much, and as you move down that line, there's more analysis, there's more evidence. And so you have to be very careful about which sources you're selecting to get a sense of what really happened and what the evidence tells us. But there's also an activity that I do that kind of ties in with what this question is asking, and I call it sort of the stripped down source. And so what I do is I take usually like 4 or 5 different types of sources on a particular topic, say like in hydraulic fracturing or fracking. And one of them might be like an opinion piece, one might be a study, one might be just like a news report from like the New York Times, whatever. But what I then do is I painstakingly go through all the sources and I copy and paste them into like a doc, and then I strip out all identifying information of where they come from. So there are no links, there are no citations, there are no authors' names, nothing. So all the students have to go on is literally just clean text. And then I put them in groups and I have them read them and figure out, do you trust this and why? And what are the red flags and what are the green flags? And so they're often frustrated when they start doing it because they have nothing to go on. They don't know where this came from or who's writing it. And so they just have to base some of their initial sort of feelings about it on what they're reading. And then later I reveal where it came from. And so that helps them to kind of look for certain types of language or certain types of like emotional responses in an opinion piece, or maybe the indication of some evidence in a study. And so that helps them to kind of filter out all the extraneous stuff that you would normally see on a web page inside of a web browser.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. And then Sarah?
Yeah, I mean, I love those activity ideas, especially Roz. I do something similar with timelines and things as well. But I think for me, it's sort of, just breaking it down on the one hand and giving students a chance to sort of practice developing these skills. Because, the more and more you do it, the more comfortable you get with the terminology and these habits of mind and kind of recognizing certain things. So in my class, we had sort of like low stakes kind of discussion board activities every week where people would post something and then bring it in and discuss it and find different examples, find memes, different things. And we sort of unpack that, whether you're identifying, the logical fallacy at work or seeing if you can spot the bias in something, or just sort of conducting this analysis. And I noticed they got more and more confident as time went on at kind of pinpointing things or calling back to something or remembering a certain maybe technique they'd recognized before. I also like to do a good bit about, having students maybe keep like a personal media log and really weave in some mindfulness and kind of the emotional component with all of this as well. So kind of structuring ways where, because, a lot of misinformation can be very emotional and deliberately inflammatory in some respects. And so getting students to reflect on their own responses and how they're kind of situated in this ecosystem and what they're consuming and the effects it can have, just to sort of empower them with that sort of self-awareness and that reflection going into it as well. But definitely, just smaller activities and just sort of practice with things to help them start identifying things more readily. And like you said, really gain that confidence that they need.
You just heard from Sarah Morris, Head of Instruction and Engagement at Emory University Libraries, Dan Chibnall, STEM Librarian and Assistant Professor of Librarianship at Drake University, Roz Tedford, Director for Research and Instruction at Wake Forest University, and Mila Steele, Senior Publisher, Social Sciences at Sage Publishing. This series is brought to you by Sage Publishing. Join us next week for our final episode of this series, where my guests talk about how they measure the success of their instruction and how, in an ideal world, InfoLit can be scaled up to an institutional level.
I was almost immediately approached to do my class as like a one-shot, like a long one-shot for these adult learners. And I've done it now a couple of times, and it's always just packed to the gills with people from the community who just want to know as much as possible about fake news. And, they have all these sort of worrisome questions. And it's really interesting because some of the questions they ask are exactly the same ones my students ask. And then some of the questions they ask are completely different. So I feel like those are a couple of ways that, we can kind of say, hey, librarians, we have our toes in a lot of different, bodies of water. We know how this stuff works. Give us a chance and we can sort of spread the word in different places.
If you like what you hear, rate us or give us a review on your podcast platform of choice. And if there's a topic you'd like us to cover, drop me a line. I'm at bmickey@ala-choice.org. As always, sponsorship and advertising for the Authority File podcast are handled by Choice's advertising manager Pam Marino, and all of our episodes are produced by Choice's senior digital media specialist Mark Dirks and digital media assistant Sabrina Kofer. That's all for this week. Thanks for joining us.